Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Welcome to this new episode of Awake Minute by Minute podcast. This is minute 44. And with us, we have a guest, Daanish. Hello, welcome to the podcast. And as a short way of introduction, Daanish is a friend of Mike's and has been following the show. And now we're happy to welcome you on the show. Daanish, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Daanish, you've actually come prepared with a very nice poem. So I think we'll start off with the poem. Please take it away.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. So this poem is basically something I just wrote recently, and it's an expression of my gratitude for Yogananda, who's I consider to be a master, my master. And I think some of the things I wrote here, maybe it's something that all of you could relate to, because we all have a kind of a relationship with Yogananda. So as I read, maybe I request, maybe you guys could close your eyes and it could resonate with you even more. So the poem is called What Master Has Done For Me. And I guess you could already recognize that it's based on the words that the second president of SRF would mutter to himself as he would walk along, just chirping to himself, what Master has done for me. Each day of life now is a ruthless battle which I try to fight with strength unchained. Cosmic delusion tries relentlessly to derail and deceive me, as if by my progress it is pained. Yet strangely, things seem better than ever. How is that? I marvel and wonder. Of course, it is because of that glorious prayer which I now so often whisper. Change not the circumstances of my life, but change me instead. A saintly sister once prayed to the Lord, continuing undauntedly in the face of a severe trials. She had the last laugh as she eventually found God. In doing so, she exemplified with perfection the Master's wisdom and is now helping me to see, I'm not this body, I'm not this mind, I am the immortal soul ever one with thee. Chisel thou my life according to thy design. I pray some days with one eye open and a grimace on my face, wondering that if this prayer touches the cosmic heart, what is it that the Master will then send my way? As he sculpts my life, it really hurts at times, but I now know that my trials cannot break me. If I strive to still the mind, if I meditate and work with him, then this material world cannot break me. But lo, even this transformation is not enough. Astonishingly, my soul seems unsatisfied. For when the sun sets and the curtains are drawn, when all the friends go home, I sense a void. Life is better than ever. Then why do I feel this emptiness, this never-ending longing? In the stillness that succeeds deep meditation, I find the answer that is soul satisfying. Until I have found God, until I know him, until he speaks directly to me, no demonstration of earthly toys, not even the pinnacle of health, can fulfill me. For it is only then that I will know that deep love, which every being on this earth craves, a love that understands everything, always, that accepts, that gives without expectation, a love that never fades. But such love cannot be found in a human heart. It can only be received directly from the divine. And this is why the Lord has sent me a master to help me perfect my little love in time. When there was no one who could understand, nowhere I could turn to, when I was stuck in a ditch of misery, he held out his hand and watched my every thought. He felt every blow that struck me. He shields me from disaster, but urges me to move faster on this airplane route to liberty. And when locked into that roller coaster seat, tired, daunted, I feel downcast and unsure. I turn and find him in the seat next to me. Where can one find such a love? One that praises without flattery, that speaks the truth gently, that laughs and cries and walks every step along with me. It is a love I did not conceive of in my wildest dreams, higher than the highest skies, deeper than the deepest sea, a love that fills that void, that finally fulfills me. He is my father, my mother, my lover even, my companion, my eternal friend. He means the world to me. With each passing day, it is more and more clear what Master has done for me.
Jai Guru.
Very beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that, Daanish. Did you write that recently? Has that been something you've been working on?
Just wrote it 2 hours ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I just felt I've been following your show, and I was very happy and excited to be on it. And I just felt inspired to pen something last evening after my meditation, and I started writing it on the subway in Munich this afternoon, and I'm happy I could finish it before we started talking.
Very touching. Very touching.
Stunning. Very devotional.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Resonated with me a lot as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Daanish. Maybe you could tell us your journey of how you got onto the path of inspiration.
Sure. So I basically was going through a very bad time personally in 2019. I currently am in Germany, in Munich, but I was in New York at the time. And I think it was the worst year of my life. I had some pretty dark thoughts, and had some fears, and I was not in a good place. And then I basically read a lot of books on controlling the mind, the subconscious mind, and all these kinds of self-help books, which I've always been attracted to. And then at some point, I don't know what happened, something shifted, and the genre went from self-help to spirituality. I was always attracted to the idea of meditation, and I started doing some meditation with Art of Living, like deeper transcendental meditation. And I felt that together with reading some spiritual books led me to the autobiography, and I read that. And chapter 26 on the science of Kriya Yoga really got to me. And then I felt like I have to get this technique, and I went to the center in New York. And the rest is history, basically.
Lovely. And you've been watching the Awake documentary, I presume.
Yeah, I watch it fairly often whenever time permits me. Yeah, I really like the show.
Yeah, and the Awake documentary itself. But when did you first watch it?
Oh yeah, sorry, I got that question wrong. But yeah, the Awake documentary, I watched it the first time in 2019, just after I had signed up for the lessons. So I read the autobiography before the movie, and I really enjoyed the movie. I loved watching it, and I watched it quite a few times since then.
Nice. And with the Awake documentary, I'm curious. Whenever I watched it myself, and then I've watched it with my wife, my now wife. Have you managed to share it with anybody else? Is this a sole effort on your part of a path, or have you been able to share that with anybody else in your circle?
Yeah, I mean, I find the movie very inspiring, especially because it talks about God, but at the same time, it talks a lot about science. And for me, for a large time, my entire life before I found the path, like these two things I could not reconcile, and that was a problem. But I think this documentary in 90 minutes does a good job of juxtaposing the two together. And since then, I'm still new on the path, and my family, no one in my family is on the path, so I haven't shared it with them. But since then, I've spoken to quite a few friends who are looking for something, or attracted to the idea of going within and meditation or whatever. And some of them who don't like reading books a lot, then I share the movie with them. Yeah.
Cool. Mike, you have a question?
So did you first read the autobiography of a yogi, or first the Awake movie? Because traditionally, a lot of people, they got on the path by reading the AY, but now it seems like the movie is like getting a lot of popularity, and it was on Netflix for a while and things. Which one did you find out about first? Yeah,
in my case, it was the book. Mm-hmm. I knew of the book before because I've seen that the photograph on the cover many times. Mm-hmm. It's a very popular book. Mm-hmm. I never thought I was interested in like what a yogi had to say. Like I was interested in like controlling the mind and self-help, and not really interested in God and yoga. But I didn't read it. But then in 2019, so I used to play cricket and I was pursuing it as a career. And I'm a huge fan of the captain of former captain of the Indian cricket team. His name is Virat Kohli.
Virat Kohli, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and he posted on his Instagram that this book, changed his life. And I was wondering if this guy who's like so keen on, changing himself and self-improvement, if he's reading this book, then I thought he should give it a shot. And that's what finally got me to read that book. Yeah.
So if Virat Kohli is listening, you got one person inspired to read the autobiography of a yogi. Well done.
Nice.
Well, thanks for joining. It's really good to have you. We've got a controversial minute, I think, in minute 44, and really can be encapsulated. We'll jump into it here, but really can be encapsulated into civil rights. And I thought it was maybe useful to sort of set the scene of what it is that we're looking at again, to remind ourselves of anything else. The context of course, of Yogananda's life is a lot of the work he did is in the 1920s and 30s. And I kind of, if I was to think about it spiritually, maybe you could categorize it as a time of great awakening, but also heavy karma. So we had World War I and World War II, in those decades when Yogananda was really trying to bring some light to the world. So he was battling a lot of spiritual dogmas and things like that in that time, and of course we'll see that, and we'll delve into that in this minute. The thing that I first noticed is the fast-moving train. Early on in this in the documentary, there was trains left, right, and center coming in, and it was maybe like a theme, an analogy or metaphor. But we have another fast-moving train, and that brings us into this minute. And again, it's probably a great way to get around back in the 1920s and 30s. But we see an image of Guruji on a poster, and it's a lovely picture of him. With left and right, there's image of an obelisk in Washington, D.C., and then the Oval Office on his right-hand side. And above it, we see a caption, "The week in the nation's capital." And underneath it, the topic I presume that Yogananda is talking about in Washington, D.C. is where to go and what to do, which is very practical, isn't it? It's typical Yogananda, is very practical, trying to attention-grabby headline. And we see lots of images of hundreds of people queuing and hundreds of people crammed into a very large room, sitting in round tables, and it's all very formal. And Yogananda is standing there, front and center, dictating to the audience. And we have a second showing here of Robert Love, who we had in the previous minute. And Robert says that Paramahansa really was drawing the largest audiences in Washington, D.C. at the time. So he was, meeting with congressmen and various dignitaries, senators, judges, and so on and so forth. He also met with President Coolidge, that we'll get into in a moment. But he goes on to say that Yogananda had a rude awakening. There was a lot of racial segregation in the American South, that was Washington at the time. We also see really nice old video footage of what looked like maybe lower class Black people at the time. A lady with her daughter doing her hair, and a man sort of fiddling with some sort of instrument, and then another lady sweeping the porch as well. So that's really nice, sort of setting the scene for the topic that we're looking into. And then we hear over all of these images the narrator's voice of Paramahansa Yogananda saying that he was surprised when he was told that only white people would be permitted to attend his classes. And then he goes on to say, in defiance, he founded the Afro-American Yogoda Centre. So there's some finishing of images here at the end of the minute, contrasting images of Paramahansa Yogananda standing with only white faces, and then other images of him standing with only Black faces. So I thought all that was lovely. Mike, did you have anything to jump in to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to start with the racial segregation that he encountered in Washington, D.C., and how he was surprised by that. But also he kind of, it was really weird, right? Because he you have to imagine, like, he grew up in India, which is a country that isn't like that, and in Europe it wasn't really like that, and the United States as one country seemingly had racial segregation in the South, but not in the North. And he started out being in Boston, right, and in New York, and then he traveled the country a bit. And then he suddenly noticed that half the country is basically an apartheid state, right, where based on the color of your skin, you're allowed to go into a restaurant, you're allowed to take the bus or sit on the bus, and that is must have been a kind of a revelation, and also maybe a kind of moment where you feel like, okay, there's still a lot of bad karma around here. Also that Yogananda himself, he was like, I would say a bit darker. So he kind of would have been in the system. He would have probably not been allowed to do certain things as well, which is completely insane, right? And but he was also the superstar at the same time. So he came into Washington, DC, and like you see here, he drew huge crowds. And then when he saw that a lot of those people were, or everybody there was just white, right? Because nobody else was in there. He kind of saw this inequality and this unfairness of this whole system. And that must have been a striking moment.
You know, whenever I was looking over this minute and, you know, the topic really is civil rights, I thought, okay, well, civility, you know, civilization, this word, like what, you know, what does it mean? And a pure definition of civilization is the stage of human, social, and cultural development and organization that is considered most advanced. And what struck me there was considered most advanced. And I suppose people at the time probably thought they were being civil with how they acted. Well, oh yeah, you know, there's a hierarchy in the world, and, you know, the whites are above the blacks and so on and so forth. But Yogananda, it's another example of how his message ages really well. And we've talked about that in other minutes, right? And he was there, you know, as he mentioned there in the minute that we'll get into, he was defiant in the face of prevailing thought and wisdom. And he was able to say, look, you know, I will communicate to black folks and, you know, have communion with them. Whereas that was not seen as that was not the done thing at the time, right? So it's another example of how his teaching ages really, really well. I'm glad to see that. And it wasn't really until the 50s and 60s that we had in the US, the civil rights movement, yeah, with Martin Luther King and so on, so forth. So that's 20, 30 years after, you know, this time. So he's really coming in and saying, you know, forget this, you know, we're in a new age. If you want to talk about the yugas and so on and so forth, this concrete thinking, it's the identification politics. It's old. Priyank, what would you have to say?
Yeah, you're right in that Yogananda was aware of this, and there's a quote. It says Yogananda was well aware of the racism he and his fellow countrymen had to contend with, and he said, God does not like to be insulted when he wears his dark suits. He once said. So that was an interesting way of putting it. Dark suits.
Amazing quote.
That would be me and Daanish in this conversation.
I get understand. I'm Irish. I tell. Yeah. You know, whenever I was looking into some of the bits and pieces that Yogananda would have talked about when he talks about civility and so on, there's a great piece really on the yogananda.org site. There's a blog there called "Finding a Unity Deeper Than Race, Color, or Creed," and really it's Brother Chidananda. And he talks about the prayers for healing of racial injustice and addressing the karmic cause of the problem. And I just wanted to, maybe Mike, you could read out one of the quotes here that Brother Chidananda used, and it kind of sets the scene, I think, for really what was at the core of Yogananda's heart.
As soon as we learn in meditation to love God, we shall love all mankind as we love our own family. Those who have found God through their own self-realization, those who have actually experienced God, they alone can love mankind, not impersonally, but as their blood brothers, children of the same one Father.
Yeah, a teaching that I think is eternal, isn't it? Such a great little message. And there's so many. That was just one of so many great quotes on that site. So if anybody does want to find more, like really inspiring, as Brother Chidananda said, supercharged words of wisdom and inspiration, like jump on yogananda.org site and look at the blog. You'll find tons of great quotes there. So, you know, feel free to jump in. But Priyank, did you have more to say on this topic?
Yeah, just a little to give you a bit of the feel about the culture of prejudice. So we in a little couple more minutes we'll talk about all the controversy surrounding Swami Dhirananda, and during all of this, when he was in the South region, one consulate officer says that the Miami city manager and chief Quig, quote, recognized the fact that Swami was a British subject and apparently an educated man, but unfortunately he was what is considered in this part of the country as a colored man. And then Phil Goldberg says, given the South's cultural mores, he noted, the Swami was in great danger of suffering bodily harm from the populace. A British official met with Yogananda privately and said, while his manner and conversation were those of a superior person, he reported, I recognized that his color, while not Negro, was such as might cause high feeling in the community, and he advised Yogananda to leave Miami for his own safety.
Mike, jump in.
You have to imagine like how this even came to be, right? This kind of segregation mindset. That must be such a group brainwash, right? Mm-hmm. That people grow up and you tell them, if you're white, it's great, and if you're not white, you are the lower class. And then everybody buys into this and believes this. And they do this for many, many years, right? First there was slavery in America. And then after slavery, it was replaced with this apartheid state, which was not much better really. And it feels like when you read those kind of notes from the Phil Goldberg book, that the person who writes it on some level acknowledges how stupid the system is, but it's just how it is, right? I mean, it feels like there was already the time where people thought the system has to go, and we just have to. I mean, it took Martin Luther King afterwards with his nonviolent Gandhi methods to do it, right? But it was really not easy to just basically, it felt like the system was expired even then.
Yeah, there's another layer of prejudice in there actually, because you're criticized or you're discriminated against for being a person of color, but then the people of color have got another separate discrimination because are you educated? Do you speak well? Etc. So Yogananda was in this category of someone of color, but he speaks well. So should we give him a special dispensation because he seems to be educated and he speaks well? Obviously, Swami Sri Yukteswar, prophesied such things. So he told Guruji to, get his degree, because now he kind of fits into this gray area where he's a person of color yet educated. So it's quite a complex fabric, isn't it, that Guruji had to come out of. Yeah, Daanish, you were saying?
Yeah, I was saying it's also what's actually really dangerous about this thing is it's not just not just like a legal system or social system, but it was also probably a deep-rooted belief of a lot of religious people at the time that this is the way of God. Like if you think an African American is lower than you because you are white, then that's the truth. And so by following that principle, you're actually pleasing God. And it's really hard to come out of that if you've been thinking like that for 50 years and you believe you're a God-seeking person. And then how do you get out of that? You're stuck in that delusion, right?
There's a quote, Luther Burbank who Yogananda was very close to, and he gave Yogananda an article that he had written on science and civilization. You can find this article online. It's a random site. I'll not quote it because I don't really know the site, but you can find it if you jump on search engine. Yogananda very affectionately said about Burbank that as our friendship grew deeper, I called Burbank my American saint. His heart was fathomlessly deep, long acquainted with humility, patience, and sacrifice. And in the article, Science and Civilization, Burbank doesn't really mix his words. He is quite clear to say, I'll quote here, "Those who take refuge behind theological barbed wire fences quite often wish they could have more freedom of thought, but fear the change to the great ocean of scientific truth, as they would a cold bath plunge, the cleansing crystal waves of which are an exhilarating tonic, healthful and life-giving, removing the debasing sin of ignorance, the mother of misery, crime, inefficiency, superstition, bigotry, disease, and death." And that is a really hard-hitting kind of point there, where he was coming from the scientific perspective, and we can apply this to race and color, that underneath it, we're all made the same. It might look different, but certainly science, ironically, at the beginning, there were some scientists that tried to find the difference between whites and blacks and so on, try to make a hierarchy, which is insane to us. But that was sort of taken and run with by certain groups of people for years and did probably a lot of damage. But as science is distilled, it is becoming that beacon of truth for many people, especially in the West, 100 years ago or so. Mike, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I want to comment on what Daanish said, that they used religion to reinforce the racist ideology that they had in the South, right? And in order to do that, they kind of whitewashed Jesus himself, right? Who was an Oriental man who was not white. And I found a nice little paragraph to read from Man's Eternal Quest on this. And Guruji says there, although Jesus' teachings were preordained to establish the strongest foundation in the West, he chose an incarnation of an Oriental body, and in the Jewish race, which had a long history of persecution, because he wanted to demonstrate the folly of judging others according to distinction of race and color. True Christianity must be lived. Racial divisions must be banished. Prejudices and lack of real brotherhood are causes of war and disunion amongst God's children. We must work at eradicating all incitements to war. In hate and prejudice lie bombs and misery.
Yeah, it's a subject that Yogananda led on, and we'll get on to the subject of him defying that prevailing wind of thought in a minute. But first, I wanted to switch gear and talk about something a little bit more lighthearted. We've got Yogananda meets the president. So at the time, there were unprecedented gatherings for Yogananda, filling huge rooms. He was inundated with people who wanted to come to see and listen to his speech. And yeah, no other than the president. He was there speaking and giving advice to the president, which we can go into. I think Priyank, you had added a few bits on this, so do you want to take it away?
Yeah, so before he was invited to meet him, something quite cool happened. A consulate employee of I think probably one of the British embassy probably scoped out Yogananda's New York lectures. Swami, and then he quotes, "Swami deals in the usual type of psychological platitudes that emanate from the Hindu apostles of new religions who derive lucrative incomes by imposing upon certain elements of the American public. And this is Phil Goldberg saying this. In the writer's opinion, Yogananda suffers from seditious tendencies which might break out in violent eruptions if circumstances proved favorable. A 1927 letter, which otherwise reeks of British condescension towards Indians, counters that judgment. It seems that before he was allowed to meet President Coolidge, Yogananda had been thoroughly checked out. The Brits found no evidence of seditious activities, and the lectures they attended was deemed harmless. So he was vetted before being allowed to meet the President of America, it would seem.
It's extremely paranoid times, isn't it? With like maybe you were going to say that, but with foreign influence on one another, and I suppose it's easy to judge, isn't it, to look back in time and say, hey, they should have known better. But a lot of this was so new, it might have been the first time anybody had encountered or heard of, Indian philosophy or whatever, however you might want to angle that. But Mike, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think you said the word that I also wanted to say, the paranoia. And then the question is, if you have a system and you are paranoid that someone is going to come in and change it, doesn't that mean that your system is weak, that your system is rotten? And it reminds me a bit of communism in the 80s, right? When, like I think in East Germany, they tell stories like there were more people employed with the spying agency than there were citizens or something like that, because everybody was paranoid that something was going on to overthrow the government. And it seems like there are tendencies like this here, where this whole kind of segregationist system seems to be paranoid that people come in and will overthrow it. And I feel like this paranoia must come from a knowledge on some level that this is wrong and it needs to go.
Yeah, you're not paranoid if they're out to get you. Yeah, and it turned out Paramahansa Yogananda was out to get them, but not anything but really to bring them back to God, right? So, Daanish, do you want to jump in with any comments?
Yeah, I was just curious. Do any of you know like why Calvin Coolidge wanted to meet him? Like, was he interested in yoga, or it was just that Master was creating such a stir that the president felt like he should check this person out? And is there any documentation on what the president discussed with him?
Yeah, so Phil Goldberg writes that the Washington Herald, under the headline "Sage Sees Coolidge," reported that the president greeted Yogananda with evident pleasure, and that's quotes, and agreed with his guest that it is only spiritual understanding between all nations that can bring lasting peace. The newspaper photo shows Yogananda looking distinguished in an overcoat and holding a walking stick, posing outside the White House with a representative from the British Embassy. And behind them, the president peers at the scene from a window. So this scene is actually in the minute. So we can see this, and you can see like a faint outline of someone in the window. We don't know if that's actually him, but that's supposedly him. But apparently, earlier, we should add, Yogananda had issued some lifestyle advice for the commander-in-chief through a post-interview: a vegetarian diet, periodic fasting, no ice water, daily fresh air exercise, twice daily periods of introspective silence, quotes, and no worrying, i.e. calmly active and actively calm was his motto. So we don't know how much of that counsel was received by President Coolidge, but that's pretty much the the gist of probably what they would have discussed. They discussed before that. But just going back a little bit before, when this consulate British official researched him, they would have done that because Yogananda was a British citizen or some sort of British not British. The visa was issued through the British, so they were kind of, putting their stamp of approval for him, which is why they would have done this studying of him. But I found it funny that these officials are usually pretty, educated people, but they came straight into it from an angle of like condescension and cynicism, like just saying, oh, he's kind of almost like you brainwash the people and tricks them into giving them his money, giving them their money. And so I would have expected a bit more objectivity from officials, but perhaps that's asking for too much.
You said it yourself, they're educated in many ways, but Mike.
Oh yeah, I mean, first of all, I love the whole part of you go up to the president and tell him to have a vegetarian diet in the 1920s. Fantastic. I wonder what his response was, and if he took any of this to heart. And the other thing is that this picture, when I saw this as a kid, I was and then it was always pointed out to me that there's Guruji and the person next to him is not Calvin Coolidge, but it is some government official. And Calvin Coolidge is like waving through the window. And I was always, but you can barely see him. Like the quality of the photo isn't so good, so you cannot really see him. So I was always wondering why there isn't a picture of Guruji and him. And maybe that's because taking pictures back then was such a big thing and it took ages, or maybe it was that Calvin Coolidge didn't want to be seen with him because in parts of the country that's not something.
Yeah, you're right. Because politically, it's only a losing scenario for him, isn't it? That picture. He's not going to gain any like Indian votes because they probably can't even vote back then.
Danny?
Yeah, I was just wanted to respond to something that Priyank said, where he said he was a bit surprised by these educated people had this kind of a condescending view. I actually don't find that very surprising, because if you see in history, you find a lot of highly educated people behaving in these ways, and it just tells you maybe education does not also like values are something different from like the conventional education you receive. Like as a very stark example, I mean, Winston Churchill did not have very high opinion of Mahatma Gandhi, and he at one point said, "It is alarming and nauseating to see Mr. Gandhi, a seditious Middle Temple lawyer, now posing as a fakir, striding half naked up the steps of the vice-regal palace." So, I mean, Churchill can say that. I'm not surprised that these British officials were like vetting Yogananda.
Granted. I should probably change my word surprised to just disappointed.
Daanish, to go back to your question before, and I did read online. I was trying to pull it up there again. I wasn't quick enough, but I think Yogananda was there to see. He was meeting with other people, and then he ended up being introduced, I think, more informally to the president, who was also there at the time. So I'm not sure that he was actually there formally to meet the president. Please, someone correct me on this, or if anybody has that knowledge, jump in and make comments. But I did read online there was a bit more of a detailed description of how it went down, and I think he more was introduced, and then he was saying, he took that opportunity, said, hey, do these things and be this way, and you'll be healthier and mentally, spiritually, and so on forth. He did make a comment, Yogananda, that when a reporter asked him what did he think about meeting the president, and he replied, oh, he's much healthier in real life than what he looks like in the photos, which I thought was curious. But he did go into detail of how he should actually spend his time. So he was saying a multitude of things that we all know through the teachings, but to meditate, to eat at certain times, and exactly what to eat. He did go into good detail on that: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and so on. I counted up all the hours that he said spend this amount of time on introspection and reading and meditating, and it was 14, just shy of 14 hours a day. He said, sleep for 8 hours. He said, make sure you sleep for 8 hours a day. And Coolidge, interestingly, he was a person who slept for 10 hours a day, reportedly. He loved to sleep, but he did allocate 14 hours of the president's day to kind of spiritual practice and right living. And I thought to myself, well, here's a guy who's probably working, 100 hours a week or something, and he's probably dedicated himself to that wholeheartedly. How much did he actually manage to incorporate into his life? Because it would have been a drastic change. I have no idea, but I don't think Yogananda held back when he wasn't giving him the watered down version of stuff that he could do. He was giving him the full hog, which I thought was great. Mike,
you have to also imagine it from the other perspective, right? Imagine you are Calvin Coolidge and you are a soul, right, incarnated in a body. You play this role as the president, right? And I'm sure you have all kinds of problems in your life and problems with health and everything. And now you have this avatar in front of you, right? Who can heal you from everything, who basically is so high above you in real terms. And I'm sure he got something out of it. And maybe he even started meditating at some point, or maybe not. Or maybe in his next incarnation, he kind of was drawn on some kind of more spiritual avenue. You never know. I think Guruji, he leaves imprints on everybody that he meets. I don't think anything gets lost ever.
I think we've heard somewhere that anybody in Yogananda's as a devotee has been with Yogananda in some way in a previous life. I think somebody said that on the previous minute. In some way, so quite possibly that could have then went to plant the seed.
Maybe it was you, Priya.
Yeah. Who knows? So great. We'll move on then to the next subject of discussion, which is the rather inspiring one, really, of Yogananda defying the prevailing, policies and thinking of the time, which was he founded the Afro-American Yogoda Centre to teach his, as he says, the Negro brethren at the time. And we see some great pictures in the minute of Yogananda standing with a whole party of black faces, which is great to see. They all look very happy to be with him, and I'm sure very appreciative of him, going to his efforts at the time. He didn't need to do this, but he clearly had that in his heart. So yeah, some great pictures there. And again, I found a little note online. Maybe Mike, you could read out the image of the Afro-American Yogoda Centre.
Sure. Swami gave a class in Washington for colored students and had an earnest class about 50 people. They held a social gathering on March 5th where Swami played the Hindu Esraj, is that how you say it? And the Burley singers sang spirituals. On this occasion, Swami appointed Mrs. Minnie C. Mayo as the leader of the Afro-American Yogoda Satsanga Association in Washington. This center has a beautiful home of its own on 14 Iowa Circle, NW. Public meetings are held each Sunday night at 5 o'clock with a lecture, music, and healing vibrations. On Wednesday, the African-American Yogoda Centre students meet to transact business and review the Yogoda exercises.
Thank you. And this was Minnie Mayo that he gave the honor to really run the center. So this was the group leader, and that name was listed throughout that time. Who led the activities all throughout the Great Depression, and after February 1932 issue of the Afro-American Yogoda Centre. I think it was a magazine, or it was an online, or sorry, it was an issue of receipt of the meetings. After February 1932, there was no longer any record of the group's activity, nor was there any listing of it to be found. So what became of this? I don't know. I did go online to try to kind of source this out, but again, if anybody knows more about this, please share it with us. That would be.
DC does have a centre Self-Realization Fellowship Centre, but you know, they may have integrated that that following into there. I don't know.
1932. I mean, it's still quite early on in the whole problems with segregation. So
yeah,
I just wondered what actually became of it when I saw that.
That'd be interesting info if anyone has any.
Yeah, unfortunately, the DC Center website doesn't have a nice history section like the Denver group, right?
I looked that up. Yeah.
So yeah, that's you know, the encapsulated part of the Yogoda Centre for African American. I thought it was fantastic personally, like hearing this. He's a real spiritual warrior, and he'll just do what he needs to do to make things happen. And really, as I said, that sort of teaching, that way of life is really aged well in 100 years later almost. So it's really pleased to see. Frank, go ahead.
All the stuff that we read out was actually in a 1927 East-West issue of the magazine that Guruji used to publish every quarter. So all of that was in there as well. Yeah,
there's so much good information online.
Sorry, you know which month it was?
I did, and now have I got it? No, I closed it.
Okay.
I could find it. Hold on.
I can read out a quote actually from Sri.
Yeah, please.
Mataji. Again, there's a website, the Yogananda site.wordpress.com. You can find this on there. It was Sri Mataji saying, "Let me read something prophetic that Gurudeva said in 1937. It is and this is the quote from Yogananda, it is a new world we face, and we must mold ourselves to the changes. An absolute necessity for the new generation is the recognition of the divinity of all mankind and the sweeping away of all divisive barriers. I cannot conceive of a Jesus Christ or a Lord Krishna or the rishis of old calling any man a Christian, a Hindu, a Jew, and so forth. I can conceive of their calling every man my brother. There will be no new order built on contempt for other races or on a chosen people complex, but rather on recognition of the divinity of every man who walks the face of this earth and on recognition of the common fatherhood of God." That's epic. Brings a tear to my eye like reading that. And remember at the time, the Nazis in Germany and Europe, they were coming to power, and really Hitler was obsessed with creating this Aryan race. So this was this was really big stuff that Yogananda was trying to influence in his way. And we know that Yogananda kind of despaired in moments whenever he saw visions of flashes of the wars happening, like, why is this happening? Partly due to the madness of this racial purity idea that Hitler and so on had. But I suppose the response from, I think this is in the autobiography of a yogi, was this is just a mirage, an illusion, a play of images on a screen, in a cinematic screen. So Yogananda was really in the depths of this karmic weight. Frank, did you find the answer?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, so it was in May to June issue 1927, volume 2, 3. I'll put a link to it on our description for this minute.
Great.
Nice. My dad has like a huge collection of all the magazines. So I'm gonna look that one up at some point.
Yeah.
He actually has the physical copies, your father?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Mike's dad's got so many books, we could open up a library, couldn't we, Mike? That'd be an awesome library.
His apartment is a library.
Great. So with that sort of wraps up the minute. We're going to be looking into cosmic delusion in the next minute and similar topics. But really with that, guys, is there anything else you would like to add? Anything that you think we missed? Frank, Mike, Daanish, go ahead.
I mean, I just wanted to share like some words from Yogananda, which I found on this topic, and I found it to be very appropriate. So it's a few lines, and he says, another measure of spirituality is whether you treat persons of all races, the brown, white, black, red, yellow, etc., with the love you feel for your own family and countrymen. Remember, you are a Hindu or American for just a little while, but God's child always. You must have sympathy for oppressed races, as exemplified by Lincoln and Gandhi. Mix with them socially, irrespective of color, declaring that you believe in the brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of the one God. As long as you harbor hatred or prejudice based on racial differences, you are hating God himself, who is garbed in costumes of all colors of human flesh. And I mean, you guys started off the discussion with some of these words, which, so it's, you know, the same theme. But what I found really, I mean, I was very, very, not, I wouldn't say astonished, but what really stood out for me is the strong words here, where he says that you are actually hating God himself if you are prejudiced. Those are really strong words. So you just have to like amend your way of thinking because the idea of God cannot be reconciled with such divisive thinking. So.
Right.
Yeah, something that we may not have mentioned, but apparently colored people weren't allowed to attend public talks and lectures at that time. So Guruji, you know, with his usual format of wanting to, you know, engage with the community through his talks and public meditations and prayers, he wouldn't have actually been, you know, permitted to do officially. And this is probably one of the reasons why he got these angry or abusive correspondence and threats and all that kind of stuff, and put on government watch lists, which we'll discuss a bit later. But obviously Guruji was not going to stand for that kind of, you know, exclusive the selection of devotees, the whole people that come to the path.
But it's really interesting. You say that people of color were not allowed to attend these talks, but a person of color was actually able to organize this talk.
I think it's in the South, perhaps because your Guruji was educated. Stamp of
a British subject.
Yeah, stamp of approval from the British who have apparently had some influence at that time. No longer.
I hear the bitterness. I see.
What do you say, Mike?
I hear the bitterness in those words. Yeah.
No. Joy, elation, relief.
Yeah, I mean, even you know, the Irish have been sort of discriminated against, and it's funny because the Irish, many of them would have went to the US and probably discriminated there themselves. But it was very standard to see signs in London and places up until late 60s, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. Yeah, and you know, when I said that to people, they're kind of shocked. But you know, the Irish in England were heavily discriminated against. So it's a real widespread kind of problem of this identity, you know, tribal kind of politics that there is still hangover today. But Yogananda was clearly, like I said, not mincing his words. Daanish, you know, he was quite firm on what he believed, like over 100 years ago, in the face of what would have been very intense hatred as well. So super, yeah, very, very inspiring stuff. Like you know, he had an iron will, and he expressed it without fear as well, which is really awesome.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Just one thing I wanted to add is that's what I find really. I have so much admiration for Yogananda, because he says things which are really simple. Granted, they may be very difficult to follow, but he doesn't mince words. He's not trying to please anyone, to like persuade anyone to like follow him. He just calls a spade a spade. So you know, he'll just point you to the truth straight away. Talk about God. If you don't like it, then sorry.
Yeah. With that, thank you very much, Daanish, for joining us today.
Yeah, it's been superb. Thank you, Daanish.
Thank you.
We hope to have you back on anytime. So, Jai Guru.
Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Mal.